Jeskai Control is the most popular control deck of the format at the moment, being able to have solid removal that keeps you alive, as well as can hit most decks out of the game, as well as good card draw and top-end threats that can end games. Shiko Paragon of the Way, Meringue River Regent, and Bez of the Bounding Spring are your creature threats for this deck. Meringue River Regent provides pseudo-removal in the late game in terms of its bounce effect, and card advantage in the early game with Coil and Catch, just making it a really solid inclusion for any type of control deck. Bez is possibly one of the best control creatures in Standard right now, being able to give you life, card draw, mana, or bodies on board, depending on how the game's going. Card's just really, really strong. Shiko, however, is the reason that this deck exists and does what it does. Shiko being able to recast spells from your graveyard allows you to recur any type of removal that you might need at the moment, recur card draw that you need at the moment, or recur Rediscover the Way so that you just get extra chances at that double strike damage at the end of it. All three of these cards are really powerful threats and are kind of what ties this deck together into making it feel so solid. This deck runs an insane amount of interaction, so we're going to have to talk about it in small sections here. I want to start by talking about the spot removal spells that this deck has. Get Lost, Abrade, and Lightning Helix are your three normal, these are your removal spells that'll be good against most matchups. Abrade's good at hitting creatures and Quarry Steel Cutters, and potentially Ghost Vacuums. Helix keeps you alive against aggro and can take out most threats that Mono Black and Dimir will play early, and Get Lost is good against just about every deck in the meta right now. I know lots of people don't like the fact that Get Lost gives away 2 map tokens, and that can often lead to stuff going poorly against you if you're giving your opponent the potential card advantage or information the map tokens can provide. I think the fact that we don't have anything that answers threats quite as cleanly means that it doesn't matter. Get Lost is still just good enough to stay in there. In a bit of a surprising fashion, we only run 2 board wipes in this deck, and a total of 5 copies of said board wipes on average, being Temporary Lockdown, the best board wipe in Standard when it comes to dealing with aggro, because it hits all of the threats that aggro decks are throwing out right now, between the tokens that they can make through various effects, the Storm Chaser's talents, the Quarry Steel Cutters, the Slick Shot show-offs. It's just great for hitting everything. Split Up, however, has a bit of an asterisk on it, in my opinion. Split Up has a downside of you can only target tapped or untapped creatures, meaning that if you're using it with Shiko to recur it from the graveyard, sometimes you have to choose the mode that destroys Shiko, which feels very not good. However, the upside of it being 1 turn faster than Day of Judgment is something that a lot of people enjoy. There's also a lot of people that choose Day of Judgment instead, simply because you don't have to worry about what's tapped and not. Counter magic is often an important part of control decks. This deck is a little light on it. However, that's more of a telltale sign of the meta than a telltale sign of how control is played. Dispelling Exhale is your tempo-y counterspell of choice. Some decks still run No More Lies for that exiling feature, but some decks like Dispelling Exhale because you can make them pay 4 instead of 3. Viewer discretion, again, both are very strong. I'm a big fan of Dispelling Exhale because it works so well with Shiko and Meringue River Regent. There being 6 of them in the deck means odds are you will probably have one or the other of them in your hand to make Dispelling Exhale better. 3 Steps Ahead is a wonderful counterspell that has seen less and less play lately. 3 mana for a counterspell does make it feel a bit slow in this current meta. However, in a deck like this, where you can make really good use of the draw discard function of 3 Steps Ahead, and incredibly good use of the cloning effect of it, means that I feel like this card deserves at least 2, if not 3 spots inside of a deck like this. Very useful, being able to clone Meringue River Regents or Bezes or Shikos at instant speed. Incredibly strong effect. You go further and further into the late game, you can counter a spell and clone a creature, and you've just blown the game wide open and will typically win from there. Jeskai Revelation does get its own talking point. It's a very, very strong spell. It bounces a spell off the stack or a permanent off the battlefield, does 4 damage to something, makes 2 1/1 prowess creatures, draws 2 cards, and gains 4 life. All for the low cost of 7 mana, and you can tell by the way I'm saying that, this spell is incredibly expensive. It fills a very similar role as Meringue River Regent, it's just that Meringue River Regent comes with a guaranteed body, whereas this one will come with 2 1/1 tokens that you might have to use a temp lockdown of your own to just get rid of on a later turn. It is a very good spell, it does a lot of stuff, it can be powerful in the control matchups because it doesn't counter spells, it just bounces them back to hand, causing your opponent confusion and slowing them down. And it's also really good in lots of other matchups. However, I feel like running more than 1 copy of this card in this deck is a big risk. The card is way too expensive to play on the regular, and starting with it in your opening hand means it's effectively a dead draw for a very long time. It's still a good card for the deck. Viewer discretion is very, very much advised, though. This thing is expensive. In terms of additional card advantage, this deck also runs 4 copies of Stock Up and 1 copy of Rediscover the Way. Stock Up is insanely good. 3 mana to look at 5 cards and keep 2 is a card that is so good that it's seeing play in Modern sometimes. Rediscover the Way is a personal favorite card of mine. It is Stock Up but slow. You look at 3 cards one turn to pick 1, and 3 cards the next turn to pick 1, so you are effectively looking at 6 cards keeping 2. It's just over 2 turns, and it can get removed in the middle. The final chapter of Rediscover the Way, however, is an incredibly strong ability. Being able to give something double strike can help you end games much faster than a lot of decks will be ready for, especially if you have cast, say, a Jeskai Revelation to get 2 Prowess Monk tokens out of it. If you could run 3 copies of Rediscover the Way, I would absolutely do it. However, Stock Up is just better. Only needing 1 blue as opposed to needing Jeskai colored mana is just a big advantage. The mana base in this deck is quite basic. It is almost entirely Surveil lands and Verges. The reason we do that is because we want our mana to come in untapped when we need it, and we want to have as many colors as possible as often as possible. You want to have double white by turn 3, but you also want to have red-white by turn 2, but you also kind of want to have blue by turn 2, and double blue by turn 3. So we run lots of lands that make lots of colors. Because of that, we don't typically have room for good utility lands. As much as I'd love to slap Demolition Field and Fountain Port in here, the tempo slowdown of having a land that only produces colorless mana will often be the death of you. I've experimented with it before, and more often than not, I felt better with this exact style of mana base. You do get 1 utility land, though. Quarry Mountain Monastery, a card that gives card advantage on a land. Exiles the top card of your library, and you can play it till your next turn. If the games are slow, you can play it on your opponent's end step, and then boom, you have another card in your hand for the next turn, effectively drawing a card for 5 mana, which doesn't sound great, but if you're out of options, it does work. This part of the video is going to get a little long-winded, and it's going to be talking about a lot of cards really fast. Feel free to pause and look at the cards that I throw up on screen as we go through, because we are talking about sideboarding. Sideboarding is such an important part as a control player because you need to know what to pull in to deal with the other decks that you're playing against. I'm going to be talking about a lot of the cards that I have up here on screen in a minute, and I will be explaining why they would be good and why they might not be good in certain matchups. There are so many options you can choose, but you have to find a way to narrow it down to cards that you think are going to work for the majority of the meta. You unfortunately cannot answer every deck out there, but what you can do is have cards that'll answer most of them. Extra removal spells, absolutely a thing worth considering. Pyroclasm, Brotherhood's End, Parting Gust, and Exercise are all cards that are very much worth looking into. I personally like Exercise as just another way of hitting both artifacts and enchantments, and big creatures as well. You could argue for Destroy Evil, however, with how many enchantments and artifacts are in the meta right now, I feel like Exercise is probably a better squeeze than Destroy Evil, even if it is at sorcery speed. Mostly because you're going to be able to recast it with Chico, so the instant speed doesn't matter as much. Now, Parting Gust as well has the double feature of being able to flicker your creatures. Very good. All 3 of your big creatures have really solid ETB effects, so having this as a sideboard option, or even in the main void, which I have seen some people do, isn't bad. Double white's a little hard to work around, but you kind of want to do that for temp lockdown anyways. And if you gift a fish, you know, a single 1/1, you can just exile a creature an opponent controls. It's a surprisingly versatile card and definitely worth looking into. High Noon, Authority of the Consul, Cutsel's Flanker, Lorna of the Third Path, and Tashana's Tidebinder can all often be really good includes against aggro decks, because they will shut off or destroy a lot of the effects that they try and go for. Authority of the Consuls is almost always a good include versus any red decks. That tiny bit of life gain and ability to slow down your opponent can add up really fast. Negate, Ghost Vacuum, and Cutsel's Flanker are also good choices against the more combo-oriented decks. Being able to hate out their graveyard or just counterspell their big spells that matter can be really, really useful. If you notice that Cutsel's Flanker has come up twice, highly recommended. They're a good answer to multiple types of decks. Riverchurn Monument and Jace the Perfected Mind are good to have in the sideboard as they help out in the control matchups or the Beanstalk matchups. Control matchups, it's obvious. Mill out your opponent when they've just gone through the game for long enough. The Beans matchup, you'd be shocked. Sultai or Simic Crab, just hardcore domain, the Golgari graveyard deck that cares about enough creatures in the graveyard to cast the big things for free, they'll often just draw through half of their deck without realizing it. That means that 2 Jaces win the game for you. Or if a lot of their stuff has gone to the graveyard, then using the Riverchurn Monument's exhaust ability will just fill up their graveyard the rest of the way. I highly recommend having at least 2 slots in your sideboard dedicated to milling out your opponent in those slower games. More often than not, you don't want to do more than that, but it's worth looking into which one you think will stick around better based on the meta that you're currently in. Riverchurn's a bit more expensive as it's 6 mana to mill out a bunch of cards, Jace only being 4, but people expect Jace to know to look for him, and Riverturn Monument is still pretty new. Wilfleaf Liege is also in here. Pixie is still a very popular deck, as are tons of different self-bounce decks that use Hopeless Nightmare and Momentum Breaker. This card is really good against them. It gets you a free threat on field that'll buff up both Beza and Shiko, letting you just have run of the field. And just having a really big threat early can often slow those decks down because you'll be hitting their life total so fast they'll be a little confused. Not really good against much else in terms of meta right now, but it is good to have a copy or two because self-bounce decks are still very popular. All right, with that massive amount of sideboard talk out of the way, let's talk about how to sideboard with this deck. There are so many different options, as you can tell. You need to do research. You need to figure out what's winning right now. You need to look at tournament rankings and figure out what decks are coming out ahead. Right now, Mono Red, Jeskai Control, and Is It Prowess are 3 very, very popular decks. So those are 3 decks that you'll probably need to know how to beat. Those aren't the only decks of the meta. Jeskai Oculus is a very powerful deck that shows up a lot. Domain still phases in and out of popularity. Pixie is still around. You got to have answers to a lot of different decks, but you can't just solely focus on one. If all of your stuff is focused around dealing with the fact that Is It Prowess is good, a Domain player will show up and just whack you out of the game. I always like to include a little portion where it talks about how to play against this deck. Playing against this deck is both very easy and very hard. The easy part is that if you're playing Red or Is It, you just try and go faster and force them to have that temporary lockdown on curve. You force them to have the Lightning Helixes, and you just keep open that 1 mana to buff your creatures in order to make them go outside of kill range of the kill spells. When it comes to playing a black deck, like, Dimir, Mono Black, potentially Domain, slot in the Duresses. If they don't have counterspells, they don't have removal spells, if they don't have their stock ups, they won't be able to come back at you and be able to have this long, grindy, controlling game. Ghost Vacuum is actually a really, really good piece of sideboard tech. Shiko wants to cast everything from the graveyard. If you play Ghost Vacuum, you can just sit on it and wait for them to target something and then exile it in response. Worst comes to worst, they'll have an Abrade ready for it or an Exercise ready for it, and they will blow up the Ghost Vacuum, but then they don't have that removal for a threat, giving you time to get aggressive against them. The deck's very strong and very good, but the deck has some glaring weakness, being that go wide decks will also do really well against it. If you can go wide enough and keep stuff tapped and untapped well enough, a lot of these decks only run split up. They don't have the Day of Judgment, meaning that you can often just win because they can't kill everything all at once. That's it. We're there. That's the end of talking about Jeskai Control. This is a very long video. I'm very well aware of that, but control decks take a while to talk about. This video took a decent amount of research from yours truly and a decent amount of looking through the meta. If I missed something, feel free to leave it in the comments below. If you liked this content and want to see more like this, please subscribe and give it a like. Either way, thanks for hanging out and watching. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you making it to the end of this video, and I hope to catch you in the next one.